Here come the two de Havilland Vampires. Beautiful aeroplane, arguably one of the most attractive jet fighters the RAF has ever had. It first flew 75 years ago this year on the 20th of September 1943, the prototype de Havilland DH-100. The Mark I Vampire came into RAF service a couple of years later, just too late to see war service. Of course, the most distinctive thing about the Vampire is that twin boom configuration. Initially, it was known as the Spider Crab before the name was changed. And that layout was chosen to allow a shorter jet pipe and minimise the loss of thrust from the aircraft's single engine, because the RAF's first jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor, one of which we've also got in the static park here, the fantastic ejection seat test aircraft from Martin Baker at Chalgrove, was a twin-engine machine. The power plant of the Vampire, originally the Halford H1, Frank Halford being de Havilland's main engine man before it became a de Havilland product in its own right as the Goblin. It's an interesting construction, the Vampire. De Havilland, of course, had a great deal of experience of wooden aircraft, perhaps the most famous example being the Mosquito that was so effective in the war years. And the Vampire structure mixed wood and metal. The fuselage pod has a balsa wood core with layers of birch veneer inside and outside, but the wings, the tail booms and the tail are all metal. And this was an aircraft that, after World War II, achieved some outstanding feats. They weren't all to do with the RAF. One of the most famous was undertaken by a man considered by many as the greatest British naval aviator of all time, Captain Eric Winkle Brown, who, aboard HMS Ocean on the 3rd of December 1945, made the first landing and takeoff ever conducted by a jet aircraft on an aircraft carrier. As far as the RAF was concerned, it was number 247 Squadron in the vanguard. It was stationed at RAF Odium in Hampshire, and on so-called Victory Day in 1946, it made the first jet flypast of RAF types over London. Also based at Odium was number 54 Squadron. And 70 years ago, this month, July 1948, it undertook a quite amazing deployment. When some of its Mark III Vampires became the first RAF jets, and by a very small margin, the first jet aircraft of all to fly across the Atlantic. They just managed to beat a squadron of US Air Force Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star fighters in managing that. Once they got to North America, number 54 Squadron carried out memorable aerobatic displays at venues in the US and Canada that really caught the imagination. That was the RAF's first jet display team, formed by number 54 Squadron. Later, one of the RAF's Vampire squadrons in Germany, number 16 Squadron, did formation aerobatics with them. They tied them together in the pre-war Hendon traditions. Not something you'd see now, but we do see Vampire formation aerobatics once again in front of us. It was always a superb formation aerobatic mount, if pilots of the day said a little lacking in power for some manoeuvres and suffering a slight lag in its throttle response. The Vampire FB-5 fighter bomber was introduced in 1949. It served around the world with RAF squadrons in Germany, in the Middle East and the Far East. They were used in counterinsurgency operations against Malayan terrorists. The first two-seat Vampire was the NF-10 night fighter. That wasn't particularly successful, but the T-11 trainer certainly was. It was the first jet on which RAF pilots gained their wings. It replaced the North American Harvard piston engine trainer. at the last stage of the flying training school syllabus. Not until 1967 and the arrival of the Folland Gnat, one of which we've also got in the RAF 100 static display from the Gnat display team, did the Vampire T11 finally see retirement from the main training role. And here they are touching down after the most delightful display. Kenneth Borg-Visler leading them, Jiri Mattila bringing up the rear, the two de Havilland Vampires from the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron.